petroleum engineer, advisor, head of corporate development, board member. Is there anything you haven't done?
If I could do one thing differently, I would probably gain more operational experience, early in my career. So maybe instead of going to business school after 3.5 years, maybe wait 3 more years, get some experience in operations, more production engineering experience, more operations experience, and more drilling and completions experience.
Welcome to An Ounce of Prevention, the podcast. At our recent associates, we believe that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Our daily commitment lies in informing our clients about legal risks without hindering their business objectives. As we like to say, we're in the business of building companies and helping executives sleep at night. So stay tuned. Maybe you'll learn something that'll help your business grow and thrive.
Welcome to An Ounce of Prevention, the podcast, where we believe an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I'm your host, Rachel Reece. Before I introduce my guests, let's take a quick look at a recent case law update and break down what it means for your business. And now for another update, this one on recent Texas legislation. Signed into law on May 19, 2025, and effective September 1, 2025, Senate Bill 1057 is a new law aimed at nationally listed corporations, which are corporations that 1. Have a class of equity securities registered under Section 12B of the Security Exchange Act, 2. Are listed on a national securities exchange, and 3. Are either headquartered in Texas, listed on a stock exchange that is headquartered in Texas, or have received approval by the Securities Commissioner under Subchapter C, Chapter 4005 of the Texas Government Code. Additionally, to be subject to 1057, a nationally listed corporation must opt in to the SB 1057 by making the specific election to be subject to it through an amendment to the governing documents of the corporation. With its multiple requirements for qualification and elective applicability, SB 1057 is a very specific law designed to grant eligible corporations in Texas options to adopt stricter rules on which shareholders may submit proposals at shareholder meetings, limiting the influence of smaller investors. Under SB 1057, to submit a proposal at a shareholder meeting to be brought forward for shareholder approval, a shareholder or group of shareholders must 1. Either own voting shares equal to $1 million in market value, or 3% of the corporation's total voting shares. 2. For 6 continuous months before and throughout the shareholder meeting, and 3. Solicit the votes of shareholders representing at least 67% of the shares entitled to vote on the proposal. Lists and qualifiers aside, what does this law actually do? Well, to put it simply, SB 1057 allows corporations with numerous shareholders to keep shareholder meetings focused on material business. By restricting the requirements for shareholder proposals and voting brought to the table at shareholder meetings, SB 1057 aims to make Texas a more attractive venue for the incorporation and listing on stock exchanges and compete with Delaware as the hub for U.S. companies. Restricting what is brought to and voted on in shareholder meetings will, in theory, give management more control of the corporation and reduce potential disruptions in corporate business caused by smaller shareholders. Texas corporate law is rapidly developing, and as more corporations elect to opt in to the restrictions of SB 1057, we can expect to see more bills empowering management to act in the corporation's best interest, even if that comes at the cost of the rights of smaller shareholders. For now, SB 1057 is here to stay, but be sure to stay tuned and follow RRNA for the latest news and developments in Texas corporate law. I'd like to thank Siam Rahman, a junior associate in our Houston office, for his help on this update. Today I'm joined by Mark Castiglione, partner of oil and gas strategy at Veriten. With more than 30 years in the energy business, Mark has led strategic efforts across the oil and gas spectrum, from large cap publics like EOG and Burlington Resources to private companies, private equity firms, and turnaround situations. Welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Thank you, Rachel. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So I'm so excited to have you here today because we're going to talk about career transitions. And you may have more than anybody that I know. And we're going to get to talk about your latest move and what you're doing today.
Sure. No, that sounds great. You're exactly right. I have had quite a few. I think I may have mentioned to you before that my father worked for one company his entire career, for Amoco Production Company, and he retired from BP after 30 plus years of experience with Amoco altogether after BP acquired Amoco. So I'm the exact opposite of my father. I think I've touched probably at least 15 companies over the course of my career.
Yep. it's becoming more and more common these days, right? Nobody
Sure.
spends their whole career with 1/2 companies.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So why don't you take us back and walk us through it?
Sure. So to take you back to, I guess, basically almost the very beginning, I graduated from Texas Tech University with a petroleum engineering degree. My dad, as I mentioned, worked for an oil and gas company. He was also a petroleum engineer. So certainly I was influenced by him and the energy industry, and I love the energy industry. I also had a grandfather that was a roughneck, so kind of felt like oil was in my blood and was happy to go into that study, that undergraduate degree at petroleum engineering at Texas Tech. So after graduating from Texas Tech, I worked all 4 summers for oil and gas companies, certainly at my father's encouragement to go get summer internships, which is a big thing to do with a petroleum engineering undergrad. But started my career with Meridian Oil, who became Burlington Resources in Farmington, New Mexico. Great place to start my career. So this is mid-'90s, started in January of 1994. The people that I worked with have turned out to be just legends in the business, right? So,
I mean, I feel like Farmington, New Mexico was this weird little incubator.
Correct. Yeah. If you think about it, that was the San Juan division for Burlington Resources, one of our largest assets, cash cow for the company. And it cycled through a lot of its up-and-coming leaders through that office. So at the time that I worked there, Randy Limbacher headed the office. I worked for Brent Smolik. Travis Stice was my second boss. Rick Moncrief was my production superintendent. So Travis was most recently the CEO of Diamondback. Rick was most recently the CEO of Devon.
Just Diamondback and Devon, no big deal.
Yeah, exactly. No big deal.
Never
2 of
heard
the
of
largest E&Ps, right? So, but Jim Craddock, John Clayton, Mark Ellis, just several legends in the industry were there at the time. And so it was an amazing place for me to be in my career for sure. So I was there for about 3.5 years, and then I decided to go to business school full time. And so I left the industry altogether, went to school full time at SMU's Cox School of Business.
Okay.
And the thought was, hey, let me diversify myself. I still like the energy business. Certainly SMU will be in a place where the oil and gas business is respected. So that's why I chose the Cox School of Business. While there, I interned at Enron the summer between my 2 business school years. And then I started for Enron after I graduated, working primarily in their producer finance business. So we were doing everything from volumetric production payments to mezz debt to equity, basically private equity, in the upstream oil and gas space. So I was still attached to the oil and gas space, but doing more finance.
And Enron's another great example, right? I mean,
Sure.
It didn't have the greatest ending, but it produced a lot of big names.
100%. And I still come across a lot of people that I know that worked there. Some at Veriten had worked there. Yes, great place to develop people. Certainly had its flaws, which we don't really need to go into that. But there were some great people there, no doubt about it.
Yeah. Enron's sort of a we don't talk about Bruno kind of a thing, right?
Right. Exactly.
Keep on going.
Exactly. But fortunately, 6 months before the bankruptcy, I had 3 unsolicited offers and chose to go work for Simmons & Company, which was a boutique energy investment bank, now known as Piper Sandler. And I was focused on the upstream business. And Simmons was traditionally a service company-oriented investment bank, but we were trying to break into both the midstream and the upstream, and I was focused in particular on the upstream.
Okay.
So I did that for a couple of years, worked with some other great folks there. Matter of fact, one of the people that I worked with there was Jeff Tillery. He was more on the research side. I was more on the investment banking side, but Jeff Tillery is now the chief operating officer and partner at Veriten. So we're working together again 25 years later, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But stayed with Simmons for a couple of years. Great experience, worked my tail off, learned a lot from a lot of really smart people, and decided to go back into industry. And so I ended up going back to Burlington Resources and worked in the corporate acquisitions group for 2 other great legends in the business, Tommy Noose and Taylor Reed. They were running the corporate acquisitions group. And so went to work for them, and that was great experience again. But kind of taking what I'd learned from business school, in addition to my finance gigs at both Simmons & Company and Enron, and applying it in more of a corporate development role at an oil and gas company, but still being able to leverage my undergraduate degree of petroleum engineering.
So taking parts and pieces and putting it together?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And we were primarily working on acquisitions and divestitures of all shapes and sizes. And it was a wonderful place. And Burlington was my home. It's where I started my career. And I remember specifically having a conversation with Brent Smolik one time when I had come back to Burlington, and he said, "It kind of feels like home, doesn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, it does." And I was very glad to be back at Burlington. Of course, in 2005, Conoco announced that they were going to acquire Burlington. That closed in March of 2006. I stayed with them briefly, but eventually went to go work for Encana in their Dallas office, and really kind of changed into more of an asset manager in that role. We were drilling deep Bossier wells, the exact same area where Comstock and Athon are talking about the Western Haynesville, or Waynesville, I guess as they're calling it now. Now they're drilling a different zone, but we were drilling the conventional Bossier sand, high pressure, high temperature. We had 10 rigs running, amazing wells, and a lot of fun to be part of that activity. But in kind of as you alluded to early on, many stints in my career, this was one that was pretty short.
Yeah.
Brent Smolik had been running the Canadian division for ConocoPhillips, and he had taken the job as president of E&P for El Paso Corporation. So he's heading up the upstream business at El Paso. Literally been on the job at Encana for about 2 months, had just moved my family in. We were up to our eyeballs in boxes, and Brent and I had a conversation about me coming to work at El Paso, working in business development, corporate development for the upstream business. And so a few months later, here I am back in Houston working for Brent again, which was wonderful, at El Paso.
Well, it sounds like when Brent Smolik calls, you have to answer.
You definitely have to answer for sure. He's a great guy, and it's been wonderful to work for him more than once. So eventually I became the head of corporate development for the entire El Paso Corporation. So not just the upstream, but the upstream, midstream, and downstream. We were trying to get back into midstream as well. But was there for about 3 years, and Alan Smith called. He had just taken the helm of Quantum Resources, which is a sidecar vehicle to Quantum Energy Partners. And they were going through a little bit of their own kind of turnaround story at Quantum Resources, and Alan was leading that effort.
Mm-hmm.
To give you a little bit of color, Quantum Resources had originally raised a $1.2 billion fund in 2006, and in April 2009, and of course we all remember the financial crisis, et cetera, that investment wasn't looking super great, but there was still more than half the investment to put to work. And so Quantum had decided to bring Alan and John Campbell in to turn that around, and I joined to help put that remaining capital to work. So a little over $600 million worth of capital equity, in addition to debt that we put on all the deals that we did.
Yeah.
As part of that.
And then what happened?
Right, exactly. So great experience. One of the things we did there is we created an upstream MLP called QR Energy. And so I was basically doing corporate development for both QR Energy and Quantum Resources, the private fund. And we did that. And this probably was the longest stint of my career. It's kind of sad to say, of working at any one place. So I was there from early 2010 to December of 2014. We merged QR Energy, the MLP, into Brightburn. That deal closed in November of 2014, and then we sold all the remaining assets, Quantum Resources Funds, the private entity, by the end of 2014.
I'm picking up on you may just have really good timing. November of 14, are you kidding me?
Right. So we announced the deal in July of 14 when oil peaked, right?
Yeah.
So now, unfortunately, oil did not stay there. OPEC pulled the plug in November and all of that. But that plays into, and a good segue into, the next phase of my career. So after leaving Quantum Resources, after we wound Quantum Resources down, I ended up, so this is January 2015, and for most of the last 10 years, I've been on my own or working with partners doing advisory work. And so in January of 2015, I ended up embarking upon that. I created an entity called MPC Resources, and ended up doing advisory work. And what does that look like? I was interim executive, board member, advised 2 private equity firms, And that's largely encapsulates what I was doing in my advisory work. But that first gig was with Sandridge Energy, working for James Bennett, who is the CEO. James is a great guy, wonderful. Went to work for him as a senior advisor, and the plan was to basically, I call it adjunct EVP of strategy, because I was not a full-time employee. However, I was full-time engaged in their strategy efforts. And clearly, Sandridge was going through a little bit of a rough patch. Their stock had traded significantly down, and of course, oil prices had moved down, and it was just a kind of a tough time in all of the space. And so helped them on several different things, dealing with those balance sheet issues, but also acquisitions, even helping with some reduction in force efforts as well while at Sandridge. And but a whole host of things, capital allocation strategy, all of that. Started out, was going to be a 6-month gig, ended up being a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And I commuted to Oklahoma City for about a year and a half. And one of those things I thought, hey, that'd be crazy, but it worked out just fine.
Never do that, but maybe.
Right, exactly. The guys at the Hertz counter knew me every time I walked by and just basically threw the keys at me. They knew who I was. Wonderful people to work with. James Bennett. I mentioned that we had to do a reduction in force, and I worked with a gentleman there named Scott Griffin, who was the head of HR. He was amazing. I learned how, unfortunately in our business, you have to do reductions in force every now and again just because of the cyclicality of it. But one of the things Scott really taught me was how to do that in a dignified manner. Yeah. And Scott's done well. He's now the head of HR at Riverien in California. So very cool. Glad to have known Scott and learned from him. But I did that for about a year and a half. At one point, had discussions about joining them full time, but did not end up going that route, and continued to do my own advisory business. Although I ended up partnering up with 2 other gentlemen to basically form a new advisory business under an entity called Meridian Energy. So we had all come out of the Meridian oil back from the late 80s and early 90s. And so we thought, hey, we need some good luck here, so we're going to name it Meridian. My 2 business partners were Randy Limbacher, who I mentioned earlier on, had run the Farmington division. He had been the COO at Burlington Resources. He had been head of all of Americas for Conoco, if I recall correctly. Also the CEO of Rosetta Resources. And anyway, it was great to partner with him again, especially as a very young engineer. I had looked up to him so greatly and continued to look up to him. And so it was a thrill to partner with him. And then I also partnered with John Campbell Jr. This is not JC3 for all of you that know JC3. This is his father, JC2.
Who I hear is not nearly as fun.
He is not nearly as so. He's a fun guy. Don't get me wrong, but he's a great partner, and I've worked with him twice. He actually worked at Quantum Resources with me, and he had also been a Burlington Heritage guy as well. So the 3 of us partnered together. And the long story short there is we ended up advising Riverstone. Sitting there, we were invited to work there in an advisory capacity by Jim Hackett. Jim Hackett had just raised $1 billion SPAC and was looking for opportunities to put that to work. And he did. He and Riverstone, under that SPAC, de-SPAC'd into a company called Alta Mesa Resources. They bought Alta Mesa and Kingfisher, and they had a management team there. And while that was going on, Randy, John, and I were looking for other opportunities with Riverstone backing, and we bid on several large Eagle-Ford, multi-billion-dollar Eagle-Ford deals. Did not get them, but really enjoyed working together and looking at these large acquisitions. However, about 8 months after Alta Mesa, the transaction had closed. Things weren't going well. Oil prices were moving in the wrong direction. And there was just some issues, some operational issues, some balance sheet issues. And so they asked us to take a look under the hood at Alta Mesa, and we did that at the end of 2018. Reported our findings to the board and ended up sliding into the management role at Alta Mesa in January of 19. And of course, this is just a rough time in the oil patch for a lot of companies, right? Yep. And so, but it was great to work with, 2 legends in the business, Jim Hackett and Randy Limbacher. What a thrill to work with them. Wish it had been under better circumstances, but very proud of the work we did. We did all the right things, but it was just a very challenging time and too much debt on the balance sheet and commodity prices moving in the wrong direction. Unfortunately,
And Oklahoma's just a hard area, man.
it was hard. Exactly right. You're exactly right. And it just wasn't working out for any oil and gas company the way they had originally thought, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
there were several companies that, were just struggling to figure out how many wells you could get in a section across the board. Every company was probably putting too many wells in a section. But unfortunately, for a couple of those companies, they were one-trick ponies. That was their primary asset, and Alta Mesa was one of those. And we stewarded that through a restructuring process wherein we ended up selling all the assets and finalized that in April of 2020, around the same time COVID hit, which, as you know, was just an awful time, and commodity prices had fallen like crazy.
Negative commodity prices,
right? The
yeah.
same month we closed the deal as the same month oil prices went negative, right? So tough times.
Impeccable timing.
This time didn't go quite as well from a timing standpoint. But of course it's COVID, and so the three of us are trying to solicit business, pound the pavement virtually, right? Because as you recall, I mean, you had to do the same thing, right? It's a little bit harder not meeting people face to face, right? And so we were trying to continue our business, but ended up kind of doing separate things, all in a friendly way. I ended up joining the board of Chaparral in October of 2020 when they came out of their second bankruptcy. Real privilege to work there. Great management team, great board. One of my fellow independent board members is a guy named Jim Addison. He's a great guy. And like I said, the equity board members, in addition to the management team, were phenomenal to work for, and they did all the right things. And so, as you recall, oil prices were probably in the 40s in the late 2020 timeframe, and thankfully oil prices recovered. And they did all the right things with their assets and were able to kind of turn that around. And as you may have seen recently, they announced their sale to Diversified, which I think is expected to close in December. So very happy for that team. Also, around that same time frame, or 2022, was a senior advisor for Post Oak Energy Capital. So going back to what I originally mentioned about my advisory work.
Yeah. I think that's when you and I met.
That's correct. That's exactly when we met. And it was great to work for Post Oak. Really good team.
Such a good team.
Very good team. And I know you've done things with them and some of their portcos, and they're great. Really enjoyed working with them and can't say enough good things about them. Very thoughtful group. But that was also, it was an advisory gig under the MPC Resources umbrella. And in 2023, I got a call from EOG to come run their be head of their corporate development group. And Joe Korenick, who was there at the time, leading that group, was transitioning to run the international division, and he was looking for someone to backfill for him. And so I did that in May of 2023, I think it was, is when I started that role. EOG is an amazing company. Was not thinking I would go, certainly not thinking I would go full-time employee to a big, huge, large independent oil and gas company.
Yeah.
But that's where I ended up, and it was a great company. Really enjoyed it. Great team, wonderful team to work with. And that's one thing I will say, common theme for me is like working with great people. Can't say that how important that is, especially the further you get in your career. A little over a year ago, they decided to disband the corporate development team. However, I'd just say that, that timing was good for me for several personal reasons. But just great experience. Was exposed to a lot of different things, worked with all the divisions. As you know, EOG is a decentralized business model. And so kind of being that centralized figure and helping coordinate with them, but also working on several international deals, including the deal that EOG announced in Bahrain, as well as in the UAE. So with Babco and ADNOC, respectively, worked on both of those deals. So that was a lot of fun.
Oh, it sounds like it.
Yeah. Really, really good. And I'm actually going to leverage that background and that experience. I'm headed to ADIPEC this next week, which is a big, huge conference in the Middle East in Abu Dhabi. And we'll be leveraging off the relationships I created at EOG. Yeah,
you were telling me about that conference. I mean, on the one hand, I'm a little bit jealous. On the other hand, I'm like, that sounds like too many people. I don't know that I would love it.
Yeah, they claim 200,000 plus people go to the conference. I went 2 years ago, It does feel like a lot of people. It's kind of a convergence of AAPG, SPE, Offshore Technology Conference, NAPE. So you have, business people, you have service companies, you have operational people. I mean, and it's a convergence. It's a melting pot of companies from Asia, Middle East, obviously, North Africa, Europe primarily, I would say. So it's a great spot to meet up with people, especially on an international scale. So think NAPE times 10 or whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to do that. But yeah, so as I mentioned, things worked out well just for some personal reasons. My father passed away, had gotten cancer, and so I was able to really spend some time with him and my mom during the period between EOG and my next gig.
Yeah, before we get to the next gig, though.
Yeah.
So, petroleum engineer, advisor, head of corporate development, board member. Is there anything you haven't done?
Well, in hindsight, if I could do, I really have no regrets. I mean, I feel blessed to have worked in all the different capacities that I've worked and done all the different things that I've done. But if I could do one thing differently, I would probably gain more operational experience, early in my career. So maybe instead of going to business school after 3.5 years, maybe, wait 3 more years, get some experience in operations, more production engineering experience, more operations experience, and more drilling and completions experience. So if I could, that's one area that I feel like, hey, I wish I could have had more experience there.
Yeah. Well, that's a good tip for folks.
Yeah, for sure. And I tell people, young people that I meet with that are early in their career, here's what I would do differently. And that's one of them.
Mm-hmm. So. Okay. What are you doing now?
So thrilled to be with Veriten. Veriten is an amazing company, started in 2022. Maynard Holt, who you all will recognize as the H in TPH, and helped create and make TPH the wonderful investment bank that it is. He left TPH shortly after they got bought by Perella. And so 2022, he formed Veriten with several partners, Jeff Tillery being one of them, who I believe I mentioned earlier. So need to explain what Veriten means. So Veriten is a combination of veritas and energy, so truth and energy.
That's so cool.
It is cool. Yeah. I love it. I love that they did that. And
they just didn't name it after themselves like some losers.
Right. Yeah, I know. I don't know. Some of these law firms, the law firms do that all the time. It's crazy. But no, really cool name. Formed Veriten in 2022. And if you recall, at that time, we were kind of on the precipice, if not knee deep in this, everybody's questioning the future of energy.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to run out of, or we're going to quit producing internal combustion engines, and everything's going to be transitioned away from hydrocarbons, and we're not going to need in 10 years or whatever, all the craziness. And we all knew that that was craziness. And I think, I applaud Maynard and the team for saying, hey, let's talk about this from a truth perspective, truth and energy. And he had created this podcast, who you and your listeners have all heard of, probably, called Close of Business Tuesday. He had started that at Tudor Pickering and Holt, TPH, but he was able to bring that with him when he started Veriten. He's had some amazing guests on there, all shapes and sizes, whether it's energy policy, just across the spectrum.
Yeah, it's a great podcast. Guys, if you're listening, you should definitely check it out.
Yeah, for sure. It comes out every Wednesday morning. It's called Close of Business Tuesday. And just go to the Veriten website and you can get access to it. He also brought in another partner named Arjun Murthy. Arjun is was a longtime Goldman Sachs research analyst, head of research there, in particular focused on energy. Arjun also does a Saturday morning thing called Super Spiked. It's either an email and or a video speaking about all things macro. Also recommend that as well. But Veriten is really focused on providing thought leadership to the energy space.
Yeah.
And you're probably going to ask, tell me what Veriten really does.
So then how does it make money?
Exactly. Good question. Very important for me to figure out when I take the job. But let me just say, first of all, I've known Maynard for over 20 years. I mentioned I knew Jeff Tillery back when I worked at Simmons in the early 2000s. Maynard was a banker at Goldman Sachs when I was in the corporate development group at Burlington Resources, and we'd worked together then, and I loved him then. and had crossed paths with him multiple times over the years. And so I reached out to him over the summer just to see if I could be helpful to him. And one thing led to another, and I ended up joining Veriten here about 6 weeks ago. So how does Veriten make money? So I think of us as kind of, the three tiers of Veriten are: one, thought leadership, which, we already talked about really in the form of the two podcasts or video casts that we mentioned. Close the Business Tuesday and Super Spiked. We have an investment vehicle that's led by a guy named John Summers, and also Robbie Kester helps with that. Robbie is partner of technology, and John is partner of investments. There's a fund that they raised when they initially started Veriten. It's about an $85 million fund. $85 million fund, not billion dollar. $85 million fund. And the name of the fund is Next 10, focused on the next 10 years of energy. Been doing that, and that's going well. It's been a great venture. So that's one way we make money. And then the third tier of Veriten is our strategy tier. And we have multiple companies that we have relationships with that pay us a retainer to be a strategic advisor to them. And so this is an annual retainer.
And this is the tier you're in, right?
Correct.
Okay.
You got it. Yeah, so that's my primary focus. Of course, I will help with any of the other two tiers if called upon, and certainly on the investment side, as we also are looking to do oil and gas. I failed to mention that, but we are looking to do some bespoke oil and gas investments as well. So definitely we'll be helping John in that capacity. But primarily my role is in the strategy tier, wherein we have 40 plus companies that we advise strategically. We are not an investment bank. We're not a broker dealer. We're not paid by transaction. We're also not a McKinsey. We're not paid by the hour. We're truly trying to be strategic advisors, be confidants to the firms that we're helping. And what does that entail? It entails, possibly a once a month interaction with the C-suite, talking about all things strategy, maybe talking about macro, maybe showing up to a board meeting if they'd like, or being on call for them. They're looking at something in particular and they want to get our strategic thoughts on it. They will call us, and it'll be a very casual conversation, or it can be a formal conversation wherein we're meeting with the board. So
I love that strategy. I feel like it's so helpful. And you mentioned earlier to me that you guys are now taking it international.
Correct. Yeah. So one of the things I'm focused on is the oil and gas space of that strategy. So let me just say, of our clients, if you will, partners is what we really call them. We have everything from all across the energy spectrum, oil and gas, but also so upstream, downstream, midstream, majors, but we all things power, all nuclear, infrastructure, industry. We have some policy think tanks, all embedded in that. But I'm focused on the oil and gas piece, and as you stated, really going to be trying to take that more international. Really want to be helpful in the international space. We have a couple of international partners today, but we'd love to get more international, and I think that will be important for us in our thought leadership, but also as we help our existing clients think about things internationally, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense, right? I mean, that way, when you're talking to someone who's considering international, you've already got that experience. You know what the landscape looks like. And oh, by the way, we have some strategic partners that we'd love to introduce you to.
You nailed it. That's exactly what we want to do. And so, like I said, I'm headed to ADIPEC this next week. We'll be making more international trips. And if you are an international player watching the podcast, reach out to me. I'd love to get to know you.
So we're going to switch gears here for a minute. And can you give some advice or life lessons to anybody who is transitioning or maybe thinking about a transition?
Yeah, of course. And of course, I love to meet with folks and talk, and especially younger folks that are thinking about this. And so always happy to have those conversations. But going back to an earlier comment, you're correct. Most people don't stay in one job, and they do transition, and you that's okay. And it's okay to stay in that job too if you really like it. But my advice would be early in your career, just don't worry about compensation. Don't change just because of compensation early in your career. Change to get experience. To me, experience is far more important, and most of your net worth is going to get created when you're in your 40s or 50s or later, really, right? So that to me, but to get to that point, you need to get the right experience. So that's really important. So
Absolutely.
don't enter into any of those decisions lightly. Make sure that you really think it through. Do your due diligence. For sure. Make sure you understand what you're getting into. And of course, the more you progress in your career, the more you feel like, hey, I need to be working with people that I like. So that cultural aspect is really important, right?
Yeah.
So I would advise on that. I would say, seek counsel from friends and family when you're making these decisions, because these are big life-changing decisions. They can be. I'm a Christian. I believe in praying, about these kind of things and seeking wisdom about that. So if that's if that fits you, I would say pray and seek wisdom about these job changes, because they're important. They're very, very important. Going back to it, make sure you do your due diligence before you make a change. Make sure, and as part of that, make sure you understand the culture. Consult with friends and family, and then if you're a praying person, pray about it. Seek wisdom on that particular decision.
I think there's another piece of your story that really kind of tells a tale, and that's that keep in touch with the folks that you've worked with before.
Yes, that's really important. I mean, as we talked about, the relationships from my very first job have continued on throughout my career. So thank you for bringing that up. It's really, really important as you work at wherever you're working right now. Make sure you do a good job, right? First of all, it's the right thing to do. Work hard, do your best. Don't take your eye off the ball. You can never underestimate how important references will be later on, and or those relationships that you may want to go back and work with them again or something like that. Super important.
And it's such a small community. Everybody knows each other, or they know somebody who knew you.
The oil patch is a very small world, super small, and where there's only like 1 or 2 degrees of separation, right, between anybody. So very important that you do a good job wherever you're at, even before you start thinking about a career transition. But yes, those relationships are huge because they will come back. They benefited me in my career. I certainly have tried to, as I hire, who do I think about? The people that have worked with me and, that I've had good experiences with, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe get a time machine and take yourself back to Farmington, New Mexico and work for Burlington.
Yes.
That's another good
course.
piece of advice.
Yes, of course. Yes. What a wonderful experience. I mean, just to be in that office and work with all those great legends of this industry.
So, Mark, thank you so much for being here. Any final thoughts?
Look, thank you for having me, Rachel. First of all, really appreciate that. It's a pleasure to be with you, and amazing success you've had as a firm, and been wonderful to watch you over these past 3 years and the success that you've had. Look, the oil patch is a great place to work. I've really enjoyed working in this industry, and I'm thrilled to see so many young people joining our industry despite the bad messaging that was out there about our industry. We are good people and comprised of great people and great assets. And, if I can ever be helpful to anyone that's trying to make changes in their career, I'd be happy to meet with them and be helpful in any way I can.
And also, if they're looking for truth and energy, maybe give you a call.
Yes, of course. If you're looking for truth and energy, look us up at Veriten.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you, Rachel.
The information and material in this episode is general information about our practice and firm and is for educational and informational purposes only. This information does not offer specific legal advice, and the use of this information does not create an attorney-client relationship with RRNA or any of its attorneys. The information in this episode, or any episode of An Ounce of Prevention, should not be considered legal advice, and persons should not act upon this information without first engaging professional legal counsel.
Thank you for listening to An Ounce of Prevention, presented by R. Reece & Associates. If you found this episode informative, subscribe to, rate, and review our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to stay up to date with future episodes, case law updates, and breaking news. If you have any questions or are interested in learning what RRNA's outsourced legal department can do for your company, reach out to us at podcast@rreecelaw.com. That's podcast@rreecelaw.com. Follow us on LinkedIn or call 832-831-2289.